loop is pretty self-explanatory. It loops through code. Let's start by declaring a variable, as always. And here, I'm going to call this one counter. I'm going to start at 0. The goal of this variable is to count the number of times we run through a loop. Then we're going to call something called while. This is kind of like if, in the sense that it needs one parameter, and it needs curly braces for a block of code after it. Again, our parameter needs to be a logical expression or a Boolean of some kind. It has to be either true or false. I'm going to say counter is less than 5. Right now that's true. It might change. I can always redefine counter. But for right now, that's false because counter is only 0, which is less than 5. And again, I'm going to put some code inside my block. I want to print the number is space, and then the counter. And what this will do is print the number is, and then the number that we're on right now. So the first time, this will print the number is 0. And remember, I have this space because there's no automatic space here, and otherwise it would put the 0 right next to the is without a space in between. And then I want to write this. I want to make the counter go up. That's the purpose of a counter. It goes up every time we go through the loop. So I'm going to write this as counter equals counter plus 1. And if you're still thinking about math, you're going to be very confused, because obviously there is no number that's one more than itself. Remember that this equals is not a comparison operator, it's an assignment operator. We look what's on the right side, and we put it in the space that we've declared with the left side. Currently counter is 0. If we add 1 to that, we get 1. Then we're going to put 1 in counter. Then we go back to the top of the loop. That's what while does. It says when we reach the bottom of the loop, go back to the top of the loop and check that this parameter is still true. Every time if it's true, we're going to keep running again. If it's false, it is no longer true. I said that repetitively. And we're going to exit the loop. While the counter is less than 5, keep running the code. When the counter is not less than 5, stop running the code. So the first time, as I said, this will output the number is 0. Oh, we don't have a period. I could put a period at the end of this if I wanted to. Plus string. Remember counter. What's wrong with that? Periods sometimes mean something, so maybe it's thinking I'm trying to do something specific with this. But right now I just want a period at the end of my sentence. So the number is, and then I'll put this number, and then I'll put a period. So the number is 0. It'll go through the loop again when counter is 1, because we've reassigned the value in counter to be 1, and it'll print the number is 1. It'll print the number is 2, it'll print the number is 3, it'll print the number is 4. And then counter will be 5. 5 isn't less than 5, and it will stop running the loop. That's where it ends. I'm going to reset our counter to 0, because remember now it's 5. So I've got to put it back at what it was, which is 0 when we started. I'm going to keep track of a sum this time. I want to do a while loop. The sum will go all the way up to 10. The counter is less than 10. Note that the first time, when I wanted it to be less than 5, it never was 5. It only ran it up to 4. It ran 5 times, printing 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It never reached 5. Starting counting at 0 is a really valuable skill in programming because a lot of other things start at 0. So keep in mind that if you want it to run 5 times, you want this number here to be 5. Counter is less than 5 if you start at 0, but it won't actually print 5. Now this time, I want sum to be equal to, the value it already is, I want to keep a cumulative sum, plus counter variable times 2. So what this will do is as the loop runs, I will keep track of every even number up to 20. I won't get to 20 because counter is less than 10. So the last one I add will be 18. Then, same as before, I want to add 1 to the counter. So I need to put counter equals counter plus 1. And then if I print the sum at the end, it'll print 90. That's right. It'll add everything between 0 and 18, but only the even numbers. There are shorter ways to write some of these. You might have noticed that I have to write the word counter twice here, which seems a little bit repetitive. There is a shorthand for it in Java, which is plus equals. I can do it here as well. Plus equals 1. This says take the value that's already there and add to it the value I put after, and then store that new value back in the first one. So add to the value that's in sum, counter times 2, and add to the value that's in counter, 1. Now, adding 1 to a counter variable is so common that there's even another shorthand for this, which is plus plus. This line of code does exactly the same thing as this line of code. It's just a lot shorter, which makes it easier to write. If you're trying to type quickly, it helps to have shorthands for things. And this is used so much that we want this shorthand. Counter plus plus means add 1 to the value in counter. You can also do counter minus minus if we wanted to go down 1 every time. You'll see this one a lot more. While loops are great, but you might have noticed that I had to declare this value outside, and I have to make it add 1 every time. I'm pretty much always going to want to start at 0 and add 1 every time. It's a really common thing to want to do. So there's a shorthand for this. This kind of loop is way more common, and it's called a for loop. We put 3 different lines of code inside this for loop. And because we're taking a lot of parameters, and they're pretty much full lines of code, we're going to separate them with semicolons. First thing is we declare our variable, our counter variable, inside the loop. Same as at the top, we wanted counter equals 0, int I equals 0. I is very common. I don't know why, but if you're not going to use it a whole lot, you can keep it short. It's like an index. You only need to reference the value that it is. You're not doing a whole lot of stuff with it. Semicolon. End of line of code. Then I need another one. This is the parameter of the while loop. It's a Boolean. Now this isn't technically a full line of code, but it kind of looks like a line of code, and it's separated from 2 other lines of code, so we use a semicolon anyway. I want this to run 5 times, so I'm going to keep I less than 5. And then I want I to increase by 1 each time. That's actually a really good thing to note now, because I forgot to note it earlier. That's a different variable. Capital I isn't defined. Only lowercase I is defined. So I have to use lowercase I. Capital I is something totally different to the computer. Declare my variable. This is my check for how long the loop is going to keep running, and this is what the for loop does at the end of every time it runs the loop. Then I can put code in here, and it's going to be the same code I wanted to put in any of these other ones. I just don't need this line at the end that tells me what to do at the end of the loop to increase my counter variable. So this one I can just do the print. Print the number is I. No, I need to add that. Remember, I need an operator. I can't just put another thing after it. It has no idea to do with that. This is going to print the exact same thing as this up here, because I did all the same things. The only difference is that I call my variable something different, but I'm not printing the name of the variable. I'm printing the value of the variable. So what we see at the output is exactly the same, except for the periods. Look at a couple more things that we can do with loops. I'm going to put our new variable called num, short for number, and give it 1. And I'm going to read it myself. I'm going to be using this one again, but I might have had a different value from it. Remember, it ended at 90, so I want to reset it to 0. Now I'm going to write a while loop. I'm going to put something funky in the while loop. While true. This is funky because I never told it to end. True is always true. It's never false. So the while loop can't end if I do that. Never-ending loops are a really bad idea unless you know what you're doing, because it won't ever run. It'll just keep trying to figure out what it's going to do and never actually do it. But I promise this loop will end. I'm going to use my shorthand to add something to my counter. So I want my sum to keep adding num every time. The first value of num is 1, so this will add 1 to the current value of sum, which is 0, and store the new value 1 in sum. Now I'm going to put a conditional in here. If our sum is greater than 100, nope, this is an if statement, I need braces. I want to print whatever our current num is. And then I'm going to put a break. We saw this last time in our switch statements. Break says, find the highest thing out that isn't an if statement. I don't know why it ignores if statements, but it's really nice that it does, because we're in a block right now that's a while loop, and I never told the while loop to end. So this will get us out of the while loop. And then we have our counter. We need to make sure our counter increases. I could, of course, write this with a for loop, but a while loop works. I think I could write this with a for loop and put true in here, but it makes more sense to write as a while loop because I know that works. I know I can give this a value that is always true, and it will still work because I'm going to break out of it. So what this is going to do in the end is print the smallest. It's going to keep adding numbers one by one, starting at 1, until it gets over 100, and then print whatever our highest number was. So it'll print 14. Because if I add all the numbers up to 13, I get to 91. If I add 14, then sum is at 105, and I've gotten over 100. So that's the last number I added when I got over 100. So it'll output 14. That's what we're trying to do here. Last loop. I'm going to make another for loop. This time I want to run 10 times. So I is less than 10. That's plus. This is the same as what I did above for our first for loop. Now another if loop, another if statement. I is greater than 1 and I is less than 6. That's equivalent to saying I is between 1 and 6, but don't count 1 or 6, except the computer doesn't understand my language, so I have to write it in a way that it understands. It's greater than 1 and it's less than 6. It's going to be numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. If any of those continue. Continue is kind of like break. It's a single word, and that's an entire line of code. And it stops doing a thing. But this time, it's going to go out to our for loop. Again, we ignore if statements. We go out to our last block. Curly brackets define a block. And it only works inside loops. Because we have to go, we just skip this iteration of the loop and go to the next one. So if I is 2, it's going to see this continue and go on to 3. It will ignore everything after this that's still inside the loop. And outside this, I want to print, same as we've always been doing, the number is. And I add to that the value I. This, as I said, will skip 2, 3, 4, and 5, but it's starting at 0. So the number is 0. And then I'll do it for 1. And then it'll skip 2, 3, 4, and 5. It won't run this line of code because it's continuing from here. It'll start back up again at 6 because 6 isn't less than 6. So it won't run the code inside the if statement. It'll skip the continue. It'll go to the print. 7, 8, 9. Remember, we're not going to run 10 because 10 isn't less than 10. That value is now false, and we're going to exit the loop. That's all for this video. I'll see you next time.